The morning sun spilled golden light across the faded red roof of Daisy's Diner, a small weathered haven tucked along a quiet stretch of Highway 66 in central Oklahoma, where dust and dreams seemed to settle in equal measure. Inside, the air hummed with the clatter of plates, the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, and the low murmur of regulars swapping stories over steaming coffee. Emma Carter, 36, moved through the crowded tables with the grace of someone who'd learned to navigate chaos, her dark blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her long-sleeved uniform shirt tugged down to hide the jagged scars tracing her neck and left arm. She was a ghost in plain sight, pouring coffee with steady hands, delivering plates of pancakes and eggs with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. To the truckers and locals, she was just Emma, the waitress who never forgot. An order who always brought extra syrup for kids, who worked the morning shift with a quiet efficiency that made her part of the diner's heartbeat. But the scars told a story no one knew, a story of an IED blast in Baghdad 2007, where Army medic Emma Carter threw herself over a wounded soldier, shielding him from shrapnel that tore through her own body, ending her military career but saving his life. For 3 years, she'd chosen this diner, this small town, this anonymity hiding her Purple Heart and Bronze Star in a locked box under her bed, alongside the faded 4th Infantry Division tattoo on her forearm. The regulars like Maggie and Harold, Tate, an elderly couple who came every Tuesday for biscuits and gravy, appreciated her kindness, but never asked questions, assuming her scars came from some tragic accident, a house fire perhaps, or a car crash. Others weren't so kind. A group of construction workers, led by Tom Wheeler, a loud, brash foreman, had made the diner their regular stop, their crude jokes slicing through the morning calm. "Hey, Patchwork Tom," called out as Emma refilled their mugs, his voice carrying over the clinking dishes. "You forget to iron your face today." His crew laughed, their eyes lingering on her scars with a mix of curiosity and cruelty. Emma's face remained neutral, her military training holding her steady like it had in combat zones where composure meant survival. She poured the coffee, set down their plates, and moved on, ignoring the sting of their words. She'd learned long ago that responding only fueled their taunts, that dignity was her only shield. At a corner booth, Maggie Tate glanced at her husband, her lips tightening, but she said nothing, burying her discomfort in her coffee cup. The other patrons followed suit, their silence a quiet betrayal that left Emma alone in the spotlight of Tom's mockery. She didn't mind, or at least she told herself she didn't. This was her life now, far from the chaos of Iraq, far from the weight of her medals, far from the memories of blood and smoke. But as she cleared a table, her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the edge of her tattoo, a detail unnoticed by most, but not by the man who'd just walked in. James Sullivan, early 40s, in faded jeans and a worn Marine Corps cap, settled into a booth by the window, his sharp eyes scanning the room with a soldier's instinct. He'd been driving cross-country, chasing ghosts of his own from a war that still haunted his dreams. Something about Emma caught his attention. The way she moved with purpose, the way her shoulders stayed square despite Tom's barbs. When she approached his table, her voice soft but steady, asking coffee, he nodded, studying her closely. "Please and thank you." As she poured his coffee, her sleeve shifted again, and James caught a glimpse of scarred skin and the faint outline of a tattoo that made his breath catch. It was too brief, to be sure, but it looked like the 4th Infantry's mark, a symbol he knew too well from a dusty street in Baghdad, where a medic's hands had pulled him from death's edge. He said nothing, but his heart pounded with the possibility of a connection he'd never thought he'd find. Emma felt his gaze, her instincts prickling, but she brushed it off, turning back to her work, unaware that this moment would unravel the life she'd so carefully built. The breakfast rush at Daisy's Diner swelled like a rising tide, the air thick with the scent of fried eggs and the hum of conversation punctuated by the sharp clatter of forks against plates. Emma Carter wove through the tables, her tray balanced. With practiced ease, her face a mask of calm, despite the storm brewing at Table 6 where Tom Wheeler and his construction crew lounged, their laughter cutting through the diner's warmth like a cold blade. Tom leaned back in his booth, his work boots propped on the seat across from him, his voice loud enough to draw glances. "Hey, Patchwork," he called as Emma approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "You ever think about getting those scars fixed, or you just like scaring kids?" His crew snickered, their eyes flicking to her neck, where the jagged scars peaked above her collar. Emma's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze, steady, pouring coffee with hands that didn't tremble, her military discipline a quiet armor against their cruelty. She'd faced worse than their words. Mortar fire and screaming wounded in Iraq had taught her to function through chaos, but the sting of their mockery still burned, a reminder of how her sacrifices were invisible to those who saw only her scars. She set down the pot and took their orders, her voice, even as she scribbled pancakes, bacon, extra crispy, ignoring the second man who chimed in. "What happened anyway?" he asked, his tone half curious, half mocking. "You get caught in a barbecue gone wrong. Or did someone do that on purpose?" The diner's hum faltered as heads turned. Maggie Tate's fork paused mid-air, her husband, Harold, frowning into his coffee, but neither spoke. The trucker at the counter buried his face deeper in his newspaper, the other patron's silence a heavy weight that pressed against Emma's chest. She wanted to disappear, to retreat to the anonymity she'd carved out in this small Oklahoma town where no one knew she'd been Sergeant Emma Carter, 4th Infantry Division medic who'd saved 19 lives. The foreign IED stole her career and left her with scars she couldn't hide. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and moved to the next table, her movements precise, like she was still navigating a field hospital under fire. Across the room, James Sullivan watched from his booth, his Marine Corps cap tilted low, his coffee cooling as he studied Emma with growing certainty. Her posture, her efficiency, the way she absorbed the crew's taunts without flinching, it was the bearing of a soldier, someone who'd been tested in ways these men could never understand. He'd seen it before in Iraq, where courage wasn't loud, but quiet, like the medic who dragged him from a burning Humvee in 2007. Her voice steady through the chaos, telling him, "You're gonna make it, Marine, just hold on." When Emma refilled his cup, her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the edge of her tattoo, the faded lines of the 4th Infantry's crest, unmistakable to someone who'd served in the same war. His heart raced, the memory of that day flooding back. The dust, the heat, the pain, and the hands that refused to let him die. "Coffee, James?" asked, his voice soft but probing, and Emma nodded, her eyes meeting his for a moment before darting away. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone neutral, but her instincts prickling under his gaze. She turned away quickly, her sleeve tugged down, as if to guard her secret, but James's mind was already racing, connecting fragments of memory to the woman before him. He wanted to ask more, to confirm what he suspected, but her guarded demeanor stopped him. She was hiding, and he knew better than to push a fellow veteran too soon. Meanwhile, Tom's crew grew bolder, their voices carrying as they mocked her limp, a slight hitch in her gait from the shrapnel that had torn through her leg. "Move faster," Scarface 1 called as she delivered their plates, "or you gonna make our food as cold as your face looks." Emma set the plates down, her expression unchanging, though her fingers lingered on the tray a moment longer than necessary. She thought of the soldiers she'd treated, their broken bodies and unbroken spirits, the way they'd joke through their pain to keep each other strong. Their memory gave her the strength to walk away head high, ignoring the laughter that followed. At a nearby table, a young girl, maybe 6, stared at Emma, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Lady," she asked, her voice cutting through the din, "did your scars hurt?" The question hung in the air, simple and unguarded, and for a moment Emma's mask slipped, her eyes softening as she knelt beside the girl's chair. "Not as much as being invisible," she said quietly, her words carrying a weight the child couldn't grasp. but that landed heavily on James's heart. He'd heard that voice before, not just in tone, but in spirit, calm, professional, unbreakable even. As bullets flew, the diner's other patrons shifted uncomfortably, Maggie whispering to Harold that someone should say something, but their silence held firm, a collective failure that let Tom's cruelty fill the space. Emma stood brushing off the girl's question with a small smile and moved to clear another table, her routine a shield against the world's judgment. James's fingers tightened around his coffee mug, his mind torn between respect for her privacy and the need to know if she was the one who'd saved him. He'd spent years wondering about that medic carrying her voice in his dreams, a debt he could never repay. Now here she was, or might be, serving coffee and enduring insults in a diner that didn't deserve her. He decided to wait to watch a little longer, but the tattoo, the scars, the quiet strength, they were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't ignore. As Emma passed his table again, her sleeve shifted once more, the tattoo clearer now, and James's breath caught the 4th Infantry's mark, a beacon from a war they'd both survived. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped, sensing her walls were too high for a direct approach. Instead, he sipped his coffee, his eyes following her as she moved through the diner, a hero hidden in plain sight, unaware that her carefully guarded world was about to crack open. The hum of Daisy's diner faltered as Tom Wheeler's voice sliced through the morning bustle, his taunts sharper, now emboldened by the silence of the patrons who let his cruelty go unchecked. Emma Carter moved past his booth, her tray laden with empty plates, her face a mask of composure despite the fresh barb he hurled. "Look at that limp scar face," he sneered, his crew chuckling as they shoveled forkfuls of eggs. "Maybe if you hustled more, we'd tip you enough to fix that face." Emma's fingers tightened on the tray, her scars burning under her sleeve, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen only as broken. She set the plates in the dish bin, her movements deliberate, her military training keeping her steady as it had in Baghdad, where she'd stitched wounds under gunfire, her hands never shaking then or now. She'd saved lives 19 soldiers carried home because of her, but here she was, just patchwork, the waitress, enduring the kind of casual malice that stung worse than shrapnel. The regulars, Maggie and Harold Tate, shifted in their booth, their faces tight with discomfort, but their voices absent. The trucker at the counter flipped a page of his newspaper, too loudly a shield against the scene unfolding. Emma wanted to vanish, to sink back into the anonymity she'd built over 3 years at this diner, where her Purple Heart and Bronze Star stayed locked away, her 4th Infantry tattoo hidden like a secret she couldn't afford to share. But across the room, James Sullivan's eyes never left her, his Marine Corps cap low, his coffee untouched, as he pieced together a memory that made his pulse race. He'd watched her all morning, her quiet strength, her disciplined movements, the way she absorbed Tom's insults with a dignity that screamed soldier. When she'd refilled his cup earlier, her sleeve had slipped, revealing the faded edge of her tattoo, the 4th Infantry's crest, mark he knew from a blood-soaked street in 2007, where a medic's hands had pulled him from death. He'd heard her voice, too calm and steady, asking coffee, and it echoed the one in his dreams. "You're gonna make it, Marine, hold on." Now, as Emma cleared another table, her sleeve shifted again, the tattoo clearer, and James's certainty grew. She was the one, or could be. He couldn't stay silent any longer, not when the woman who might have saved his life was being torn down in front of him. He stood his chair, scraping softly, his posture unmistakably military, as he crossed the diner, his boots steady on the worn linoleum. Emma sensed his approach, her instincts prickling as she turned to face him, her eyes wary like a soldier scanning for threats. "Excuse me," James said, his voice low, but carrying in the suddenly quiet diner. "Could I ask you something?" Emma nodded, her heart thudding as she braced for the questions she'd dodged for years. "That tattoo," he said, pointing to her forearm, where the sleeve had betrayed her 4th Infantry you served in Iraq. The question landed like a grenade, the diner's chatter fading to a hush as every eye turned to them. Tom's crew paused mid-laugh, their forks hovering. Maggie leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. Emma's first instinct was to lie, to deflect, to protect the wall she built around her. Past, but James's eyes held no pity, only respect, and something deeper, a recognition that made her throat tighten. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Two tours, medic," she said, the words feeling foreign after years of silence. James's face paled, his breath catching as memories flooded back the chaos of rude Irish. The IED blast, the medic who'd worked on him for 30 minutes under fire, her voice cutting through the panic. He took a step closer, his voice trembling with emotion. "Baghdad 2007, Ridicule, you were there, and IED hit our convoy." Emma's eyes widened, her mind racing back to that day. The smoke, the screams, the Marine she'd dragged from a burning Humvee. His chest torn open, her hands slick with his blood as she fought to keep him alive. She studied James's face, the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried, and the flicker of recognition sparked. "You were the one with the shrapnel," she said softly. "You kept asking about your squad." James nodded, his eyes glistening. "They all made it home because of you," he said, his voice breaking. "Every single one." The diner was silent now, the weight of their words sinking in. Tom's crew looked uneasy, their bravado crumbling as they realized their target wasn't just a waitress but a hero. Maggie's hand found Harold's, her eyes wet with shame for staying quiet so long. The trucker lowered his newspaper, his jaw tight. Emma felt exposed, her anonymity shattered like glass, her scars no longer just marks of pain but badges of a past she couldn't outrun. She wanted to retreat, to deny it, to insist she was just Emma, but James's gratitude held her in place. A lifeline she hadn't known she needed. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice cracking as she fought the tears threatening to spill. James shook his head, his voice firm. "Your job was to run into hell and pull people out. You did it for me, for my squad, for God knows how many others." The words hit Emma like a wave, her walls crumbling as the diner watched a community beginning to see her for the first time. Tom shifted in his seat, his face red with discomfort, his crew avoiding her gaze. A child at a nearby table whispered to her mother, "Is she a soldier?" the question echoing the innocence of truth. Emma's heart pounded, her past and present colliding. In a moment she'd spent years avoiding. She looked at James, seeing not just a Marine, but a man who carried the same scars, invisible ones, that marked them both as survivors. The diner held its breath, waiting for what came next, a reckoning, not just for Emma, but for everyone who'd failed to see her. The silence in Daisy's diner was so complete, it felt like the world had paused, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation replaced by the weight of James Sullivan's words as he stood before Emma Carter, his voice carrying the authority of a Marine who'd seen war's cost. "Sergeant Emma Carter," he said louder now, his eyes locked on hers, "didn't just serve in Iraq. She was one of the 4th Infantry's finest medics, saving lives under fire when most would have run the other way." The patrons' faces froze, some with awe, others with guilt, as the truth of Emma's heroism washed over them, her scars no longer a mystery, but a testament to courage they couldn't fathom. Tom Wheeler's construction crew sat stunned there. Earlier laughter curdling into shame, their plates of eggs and bacon forgotten as they avoided Emma's gaze. Maggie Tate clutched Harold's hand, her eyes brimming with tears for the woman she'd watched endure cruelty for years without knowing her story. The trucker at the counter folded his newspaper, his shoulders hunched as if carrying his own regret. Emma stood rooted, her heart pounding, her carefully guarded anonymity shattered like a broken window, exposing her to a room full of strangers who suddenly saw her not as Patchwork, the waitress, but as a hero. She wanted to flee, to hide from the weight of their stares, but James's presence, steady and unwavering, held her in place. He turned to the diner, his voice rising with conviction. March 2007, Red Irish Baghdad, our convoy hit an IED. I was bleeding out shrapnel in my chest, and this woman worked on me for 30 minutes, under enemy fire, until the medevac came. She didn't just save me, she shielded my squad, risking her own life to get us home. Emma's breath caught the memory of that day, vivid, the heat of the flames, the Marine's fading pulse, her hands moving on instinct as bullets whizzed past. She looked at James, seeing the gratitude in his eyes, and felt her defenses crack, the years of silence she'd built to protect herself crumbling under the weight of his recognition. "I'm not a hero," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was just doing my job." James shook his head, his tone fierce. "Your job was to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. You earned a Purple Heart for your wounds, a Bronze Star with V for valor, and the respect of every soldier who served with you." The diner's atmosphere shifted, the air charged with a mix of awe and reckoning. Tom's crew squirmed, one man muttering, "We didn't know," but the words sounded hollow even to him. Emma's eyes flicked to them, her voice quiet but cutting. "Would you have treated me differently if you'd known should? It'd take a uniform to earn respect." The question hung heavy, forcing every patron to confront their silence, their complicity in letting her suffer. Maggie stood, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Sergeant. We're sorry. We didn't see you." Harold nodded, removing his cap in a gesture of respect, his eyes wet. The trucker cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Should have said something sooner, ma'am. You didn't deserve that." The apologies rippled through the diner, each one a small crack in the wall of indifference that had let Tom's cruelty thrive. Emma's chest tightened, the weight of their words, both a balm and a burden. She'd spent years avoiding this moment, the recognition that brought not just respect but the pain of reliving her past. Then the diner's doors swung open, a young soldier in dress uniform stepping inside, his eyes widening as he caught the tail end of James's speech. Lucas Hayes, barely 22, was driving to a new duty station when he'd stopped for coffee, drawn by the commotion. He recognized the scene instantly, a veteran being honored, and his training kicked in. He snapped to attention, his salute crisp and formal. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear, "it's an honor. Thank you for your service and sacrifice." Emma froze the gesture, pulling her back to a life she'd left behind her body, responding before her mind caught up. She returned the salute, her first since her medical discharge, the motion both foreign and familiar, like slipping into a skin she'd shed. Her eyes stung, tears threatening, as the diner watched the community witnessing a transformation they hadn't earned but were given anyway. Clara Evans, the diner's manager, emerged from the kitchen, her face flushed with emotion, her usual brisk demeanor softened. "Sergeant Carter," she said, her voice formal, "you take the rest of your shift off with pay, and anyone who disrespects you here answers to me." She glared at Tom's crew, who shrank under her gaze, their bravado gone. Tom stood, his face red, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. What we said, what we did, it was wrong. No excuse." His crew nodded, their eyes downcast, their earlier cruelty exposed as cowardice in the face of Emma's courage. Emma studied Tom, seeing not just regret, but a flicker of understanding, and nodded. "Apology accepted," she said. "But remember this, the next time you judge someone you don't know." Her words landed like a quiet command, forcing the diner to reckon with their assumptions. How many others like Emma walked among them, their sacrifices unseen, their scars misread? James stepped closer, his presence a shield as Emma navigated the flood of attention. "You don't owe them anything," he said softly. "You've given enough." But Emma felt the weight of the moment, not just for herself, but for every veteran who'd hidden their service to avoid pity or pain. The diner was no longer just a workplace. It was a stage where her truth had been laid bare, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The patrons watched, some wiping tears, others murmuring their own stories of family members who'd served a community, awakening to the heroes in their midst. Emma's scars, once a source of shame, now stood as proof of her valor and the diner's. Silence was replaced by a new sound, the soft hum of respect of a reckoning that would change them all. The air in Daisy's diner felt different, now charged with a quiet reverence that lingered after James Sullivan's revelation and the young soldiers salute. The clatter of dishes and hum of conversation slowed to return as patrons grappled with the truth about Emma Carter. She stood near the counter, her hands clasped tightly, her scars exposed in more ways than one, her carefully built anonymity shattered like a fallen shield. The weight of the diner's eyes pressed against her, not with the usual curiosity or pity, but with awe and guilt, a mix that both comforted and unnerved her. She wanted to retreat, to slip back into the shadows where she was just Emma, the waitress, but the moment had changed her. The diner, the entire room, now a witness to her past as Bosas, Sergeant Carter, combat medic hero of Baghdad. James stood nearby, his presence steady like a comrade, covering her flank, his Marine Corps cap now tucked under his arm as a sign of respect. Emma's mind swirled with memories of Iraq, the chaos of Route Irish, the soldiers she'd saved, now standing before her, his gratitude a mirror to the lives she'd touched but never revisited. She excused herself, her voice soft, and slipped into the diner's back room, a small cluttered space where coffee cans and cleaning supplies lined the shelves. Alone, she leaned against the wall, her breath uneven, her scars tingling as if they could feel the shift in how the world saw her. She'd spent 3 years hiding her Purple Heart, her Bronze Star, her 4th Infantry tattoo, because recognition brought questions, pity, and the pain of reliving a life she'd lost when the shrapnel took her career. Now that life was back, laid bare by a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. James knocked gently before entering, his eyes searching hers with a quiet understanding only another veteran could carry. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot," he said, his voice low, "but you deserve to be seen for who you are." Emma shook her head, her throat tight. "I just wanted to be left alone to do my job without explaining." James nodded, pulling a worn photograph from his wallet, a snapshot of his squad, taken days before the IED hit their convoy. 12 young Marines grinned at the camera, their faces bright with the kind of hope only youth and camaraderie could muster. "I've carried this for 18 years, he said, showing it to her. "Every one of them made it home because of medics like you." Emma's eyes traced the faces, her fingers brushing the photo, as if she could feel the pulse of those she'd saved. She remembered the weight of their lives in her hands, the blood, the urgency, the way she'd pushed through fear to keep them breathing. "That's why I couldn't stay quiet," James continued. "You gave me my life. I had to give you your truth back." Their conversation turned to the years since the war, the struggle to find purpose in a world that didn't understand the cost of service. James shared his own battles, the sleepless nights, the guilt of surviving when others didn't, and Emma found herself opening up about the loneliness of her discharge, the way civilian life felt like a foreign country. Their shared scars, visible and invisible, forged a bond deeper than words, a quiet alliance between two soldiers who'd found each other across time. Back in the diner, the atmosphere was shifting, the patron's silence giving way to murmurs of resolve. Tom Wheeler and his crew, still red-faced with shame, huddled at their booth, their earlier cruelty now a weight they couldn't shake. Tom stood hesitantly, approaching Clara Evans, the manager, with an idea. "We want to make this right," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "Maybe a donation to a veterans group, something to show we're sorry." Clara nodded, her eyes sharp but approving, and by the end of the day, the crew had drafted a handwritten apology to Emma and pledged to raise funds for a local VA program. The regulars, too, were stirred. Maggie and Harold Tate proposed a wall of valor for the diner, a place to display photos and stories of local veterans, starting with Emma's. They approached her as she emerged from the back room, their voices tentative but earnest. "We'd like to honor you," Maggie said, "if you'll let us." Emma hesitated, her instinct to hide warring with the warmth of their sincerity, but she nodded, feeling the first stirrings of something new, purpose. Over the next few days, Emma took a step. She hadn't planned volunteering at the local VA clinic, using her medic skills to help veterans navigate their care. The work felt like coming home, her hands steady as she guided a young soldier through paperwork, her voice calm as she listened to an older vet's stories of Vietnam. She realized service didn't end with a uniform, it lived in the small acts of helping others, just as she'd done in Iraq. James became a regular at the diner, stopping by whenever his travels brought him through Oklahoma, his visits a quiet anchor for Emma as she navigated her new reality. They'd sit over coffee after her shift, swapping stories of their deployments, laughing over the absurdities of military life, crying over the losses that still stung. Their friendship wasn't romantic, but profound, built on the shared language of sacrifice and survival. The diner itself began to change. Clara hung a sign declaring veterans eat free on holidays, and the Wall of Valor took shape. Emma's story pinned up first, alongside a photo of her in uniform, her face young and unscarred, but her eyes already carrying the weight of war. Other veterans added their stories: a trucker who'd served in Desert Storm, a teacher who'd flown helicopters in Afghanistan, and the diner became a haven, a place where service was seen and honored. Emma struggled with the attention at first. Her scar is now a public badge of courage rather than a private shame. But each thank you, each nod of respect, chipped away at the wall she'd built. She began to see her past not as a burden, but as a bridge connecting her to others who'd served, who'd survived, who carried their own hidden wounds. The community's awakening wasn't just about her. It was about every veteran who'd walked unnoticed among them, their sacrifices buried under civilian indifference. Emma's truth had cracked that indifference open, revealing the heroes who served coffee, fixed cars, taught school, all while carrying the weight of wars fought far away. As she locked up the diner one evening, James waiting to walk her to her car, she felt a shift inside her, a lightness she hadn't known since before the IED. Maybe being seen wasn't so bad, she thought. Maybe it was what she'd needed all along. 6 months after the morning that changed Daisy's diner, the small Oklahoma roadside haven had transformed into something more than a place for coffee and pancakes. It had become a beacon for veterans, a gathering spot where stories of service were shared over steaming mugs and plates of hash browns. The Wall of Valor now stretched across one side of the diner, its boards crowded with photographs and handwritten notes, a Marine's faded snapshot from Vietnam, a nurse's commendation from Afghanistan, a trucker's dog tags from Desert Storm. And at the center, Emma Carter's story, her Army medic uniform crisp in a framed photo, her scars hidden but her eyes bright with purpose. The diner's hum was different, now warmer, threaded with laughter and the low murmur of veterans, swapping tales, their voices carrying the weight and pride of lives shaped by sacrifice. Emma moved through the tables, her long sleeves still tugged down out of habit, but her posture lighter, her smile genuine as she refilled mugs and delivered plates. She was no longer just Emma the waitress, she was Sergeant Carter, a hero whose story had rippled beyond the diner's walls, sparking change in a community that had once looked past her. The locals who'd once stayed silent during Tom Wheeler's taunts now greeted her with nods of respect. Maggie and Harold, Tate always lingering to ask about her day, their gratitude a quiet amends for years of inaction. Clara Evans, the manager, had doubled down on her promise to veterans eat free program on holidays, drawing crowds of former soldiers who found not just a meal but a place to belong. Word of Emma's story had spread first through local news, then picked up by a national outlet, inspiring diners across the country to create their own Walls of Valor programs to honor the hidden heroes in their towns. Emma had struggled with the spotlight, at first her instinct to hide warring with the connection she felt when veterans stopped by to thank her, their handshakes firm, their eyes carrying the same quiet understanding she shared with James Sullivan. James had become a steady presence, stopping by Daisy's whenever his cross-country drives brought him through Oklahoma, their coffee chats, a ritual that grounded them both. They'd sit in a corner booth after her shift trading stories of Iraq. The absurd, the painful, the moments that only another veteran could grasp. He'd shown her more photos of his squad over time, their faces now familiar to her like comrades she'd never met but saved. Their friendship was a lifeline, not romantic, but forged in the fire of shared survival, a bond that let Emma lean into her past without fear. She'd started speaking at veteran events, small at first, a VFW, Hall, a local school, then larger ones, where her story of quiet service moved audiences to tears. Hiding my past kept me safe, she'd say, her voice steady, but I learned sharing it set me free. The words weren't just for them, they were for her, a mantra that helped her embrace the scars she'd once buried. Tom Wheeler and his crew had changed, to their shame, from that pivotal morning, spurring action beyond their initial apology. They'd raised over $12,000 for a local veterans charity, organizing a community run that drew hundreds. Tom himself speaking awkwardly but earnestly about how meeting Emma had opened his eyes. We judged her by her scars, he told a reporter, not knowing they were proof of courage. It's a lesson I won't forget. The crew still came to the diner, but their loud bravado was gone, replaced by quiet respect, a nod to Emma as they ordered their usuals. The young soldier Lucas Hayes, who'd saluted her that day, had become a regular too, stopping by on his drives between duty stations. His presence a reminder of the military world Emma had left but still belonged to. One evening during a veterans event at the diner, the parking lot packed with cars, the air filled with laughter and the clink of glasses raised in toasts. Emma stood near the wall of valor, watching as Lucas pinned a new photo to the board, a picture of his platoon taken before their last deployment. He caught her eye and grinned, raising his coffee mug in a silent salute, and Emma smiled back, her heart full in a way it hadn't been since her days as a medic. James stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, as they took in the scene, the diner alive with stories of service, of lives lived for others. "You did this," he said quietly, "not just for yourself, but for all of them." Emma shook her head, her eyes on the wall where her photo hung among so many others. "They did it too," she said. "Every one of them served in their own way." The event stretched late, veterans lingering to share one more story, one more memory, and as Emma locked up the diner, Clara counting the till James waited to walk her to her car. The Oklahoma night was cool, the stars bright above the highway, and Emma felt a peace she hadn't known since before the IED stole her old life. Her scars, once a source of shame, were now a bridge connecting her to a community that saw her truly not as patchwork or a victim, but as a hero, who'd carried her service quietly until someone took the time to see. She thought of the soldiers she'd saved, their faces etched in her memory, their lives a legacy she carried in her hands, her heart, her scars. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly behind her, its glow a small light in the vast dark, a reminder that even in the quietest places, courage could shine through. Emma's story had done more than change her life. It had awakened a town, a nation, to the veterans who walked among them, their sacrifices often unseen until a moment of recognition brought them into the light. She turned to James, her voice soft. "But sure, I thought my service ended when I left the Army, but it's still here in every person I help, every story I share." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the same truth. "That's what makes you a hero," he said. "Not just what you did, but who you are." As they walked to her car, the diner's glow fading behind them, Emma carried a new purpose, not to hide, but to honor her past by living it openly, a waitress, a medic, a veteran, whose scars told a story of valor that would never again be forgotten. The journey from anonymity to recognition had healed not just her, but a community, reminding them all to look beyond appearances, to see the heroes who serve in silence, their courage a quiet flame waiting to be kindled.